I did break my arm on Sunday, my shoulder to be technically correct. So I cannot tie my shoes, I cannot tie my hair, but I can code. Lucky you, eh? I work in the Spring team, I work on security stuff, and these days everybody's doing AI, so I am working on Spring AI and MCP for Java. Here's all my contact information. The reason I come here is because I want to meet you, I want to learn from you. I want to show you a few stuff in the process, but I really want to learn what you're doing, how you're using our projects, what are the pain points, and how we can improve them. Speaking of breaking my arm, when I shared this on social media lately, Sergi answered to say, oh, I broke my arm, and then Sergi said, ha, easy, I did that last time, right? So if you want to speak at Spring I/O next year, you know what you have to do. Maybe don't do that, I don't know. All right, so Spring Security 7, I have a ton of content. It's going to go fast, not much time for questions during the presentation, but after I'll take all the questions outside for 2 days. If you want to go over what's new by yourselves, then you can go on the What's New page. Incredible, right? So in here's the list of all the things that we thought were new for this release. There's also a migrating to 7 section in the guide. So you can go for specific applications if you have things that don't compile or that behave weirdly. Go take a peek here. Your SAML2 default configuration has slightly changed. You can go and take a look at that. But I want to highlight the new stuff. Hey, here's that guy. I want to highlight the new stuff that we have, right? The reason you're here is to see some exciting things. So I'm going to go over the boring stuff first. And then we're going to go over the biggest feature that's been delivered in this release, which is multi-factor authentication. Then we'll take a look at modular configuration, what that means, and how it improves the configuration of your Spring Boot applications that have security in them. We'll look at OAuth2, new features on the authorization server side and on the client side. And maybe at the end, if I have a little bit of time, I'll cover MCP security, or at least I'll point you in the right direction. So boring stuff first. We've changed some modules. So anybody here using the old access decision, voter manager, anything? Yeah, right? A few of the. So that has been deprecated since the end of version 5. Now the infrastructure has moved to a new authorization manager infrastructure. You should look into that. We didn't want to punish you for not moving away, so we kept these classes, but they're outside of the core now. So in Spring Security 7, they're in a new package called Spring Security Access. Kerberos. Anybody here is unfortunate enough that they have to use Kerberos? 1, 2, 3. Oh, wow. Quite a few people. So we brought this into org Spring Framework.security. It was its own group ID before. And we aligned the versions with Spring Security. So we jumped from 2.something to 7.0. Same goes for Spring Authorization Server. It was its own project. The coordinates are still the same, so it's still, org Spring Framework Security, Spring Security, OAuth2 Authorization Server. The difference is that we changed the version from 2.something to 7.x. These two last things, Kerberos and Auth2 Server, it's mostly for our convenience to release these packages more easily. Now we release everything together. They have the same number. We don't have to think about it. We have a single release process. It shouldn't change much for you. We removed a few things. And I want to start by the thing that you like the most. We removed OAuth2 password grant in the client. Anybody using OAuth2 password grant? 1, 2. And you're not ashamed of it, that's good. So I know I will make you sad. I know a lot of people use this. I know it makes people sad because people have been asking for OAuth2 password grant in the authorization server, which we have never implemented for a reason, right? I know it makes you sad, but the reason is if you go to auth.net and you go look at the recommendation, they will tell you the password grant is a legacy way to exchange username and password. So you pass that to a client application. The client application uses that to get a token on your behalf. And so since you're passing your password to a client application, it is not recommended that this thing be used at all anymore, right? So you should not be using this. That's why we remove it. If you are in an extremely high trust environment and you know what you're doing and you really want to use this, you can re-implement it from the old classes we have. It's not a big lift. It's like 3, 4 classes. But the real thing that you should do if you're using password grant is move to authorization code. We have all the infrastructure for that now, for single-page apps, for backend apps, for everything. So that's gone. Sorry. Another thing that's gone, it's been in the making for a while. So you remember the classic Spring Security DSL with the magic keyword and, right? And you had this blah, 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 and it's gone. So we deprecated this at the end of the 5 line, and we introduced a Lambda configuration. So instead of using this and thing, you can't do this anymore. It doesn't compile. You have to use lambdas. It's very easy to migrate from one to the other. You take, this is a configurer that configures authorization for HTTP requests. And this is basically the closing brace, the and here. So you take everything that's between the configurer and the closing brace, and you put it inside the lambda, right? Should be fairly easy. I think tools like Open Rewrite will do that for you automatically, so you don't have to think too much about it. All right. Boring stuff out of the way. Now let's get to the exciting new things. Multi-factor authentication. I am very excited because I think it's the longest awaited feature in Spring Security of all time. If you look at the issue number, 2,603, I think today the issue numbers are in the 19,000. Right? So we can go take a look. And this issue was migrated from Jira on November 8th, 2013. I wasn't even born back then. And it was closed September 24th, 2025, less than 12 years. See, we can go fast when we want. All right, so let's see what this looks like. I have an existing application here. And this application, is it running? It's not running. Let's make it run. Run, come on, wake up. Here we go. Voila, first try. So this is a basic Spring Boot application. I have a bunch of pages already. It has a public page, so I can go publicly, and has a private page. To go into the private page, I have to log in. And I implemented 2 ways of logging in: password, username and password, and one-time token. One-time token is a fairly recent addition. We did that 2 years ago, I think. So the way this is configured, let's do presentation. Here we go. So you have a configuration class, usually security configuration or something. You create a security filter chain in which you do your authorization rules, right? So this says, oh, there's some public pages here because they're permit all. And then there are some admin pages, only the admins can see, and the rest you must be logged in. And then you can say, how can you log in? So you can log in with form login, username and password, and then you can log in with one-time token, right? So with this, I can log in Daniel PW, right? And I'm logging into the page here. And the one thing you'll notice is when I look on that page at the details of the user who's logged in, so username, password, authentication token, but when I look at their authorities, so the thing that we use for permissions, they have a role, and the role is user, so Daniel is a user, and they have a new type of authority, a factor granted authority. So this is a simple granted authority. It's just a string with a prefix that says it's a role. But this represents the things I used to log in. So in here, I use the password. And it tells me when this happened. So this was 4041 UTC, right? So 1 minute ago, something like that. And using that, we can now make authorization decisions saying, you must have more stuff to access this page. And the way you do it is your configuration class. Is the font size OK for everyone in the end? In the back of the room? OK? Yeah, OK. So in here, you say enable multi-factor authentication. It requires an authorities parameter. And so in here, you can say which factors you require. And so factor granted authority dot password, and then factor granted authority dot one-time token. And so with these 2 things, now, if I try and access the private page, I get redirected to the login page again, but with some details. It tells me here, well, you must log in with the factor type OTT, one-time token, because it's missing, right? I only logged in with my username and password. So now I must do OTT, so let's send a token. I get an email here with my token, and then I can log in. And now I'm able to access this page. And in the details of the authentication of the user, there's 2 factors. There's one-time token and password with different timings, right? I logged in at 1441 on this one and 1443. 2 minutes later, I got my one-time token. So with this thing applies a site-wide authorization mechanism. But maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you have, the private page is fine. Anyone with a simple authentication can access it. But maybe for, say, there's an admin page, and I want admins to have two-factor. And so you can't do it like this. You have to act at the endpoint level, so in here, in this authorized HTTP request. And before we go into how you actually do it, I want to rewind and kind of explain how this works. All of these methods, permit, has role, authenticated, and so on, they all, under the hood, wrap the method that's called access. And access is the API we give you to make complex authorization decisions. For example, in here, I have a Daniel page, /Daniel, and I want that page to be accessible by Daniel only, right? So we could do something like auth_z.requestManager/Daniel dot, and I don't have a, for example, isDaniel. That doesn't exist in Spring Security. I tried, but the others don't want it. So the way you do it is you do .access, and in here you pass an authorization manager of request context. This authorization manager can be expressed with a lambda. So there's an authentication supplier, and then a request context, because here we're doing authentication in the context of an HTTP request. And from that, you must return a new authorization decision. So by default, I deny access to this page, and then I can look at the authentication, so the user who's logged in. So I obtain it from the context, and that gives me an authentication. And so if the authentication is not null, the user is logged in, and the name is equal to Daniel, equals ignore case to authentication.getName, then in that case, yes, this is Daniel. I am allowed to view the page, return new authorization decision of true, right? Something like that. So now, if we go, say, Safari, and we say localhost 8080, go to private, log in as Josh. There we go. Need a token. Fine. Take the token, go back to Safari, sign in, right? And then Josh is not allowed to see the Daniel page because Josh is not Daniel. However, I am Daniel, so I can see the Daniel page. Yes, I'm Daniel. That's fine. OK? So if you want to do complex multi-factor authentication setups, you're going to use this access thing. So how do you use it? So let's go back. We have our enable multi-factor authentication, and I say, well, I don't want to enforce these site-wise. I want a special endpoint. So let's say that the admin endpoint here, right, this has role admin, I want this one to be covered by MFA. So how do I do it? Well, I can do a authorization manager factory. Right? This type is a thing that creates authorization managers. And so which one is it? It's the multi-factor one. And so it requires factor. We said factor OTT, and then factor password. And then we build. And then this is, call it MFA factory, or just MFA for short. And so in here, instead of using has role, we say access MFA.hasRole admin, right? So it's admin with MFA, both together. So this is a factory, OK? So that means if I go back to my main app, now as Daniel, right, I can access it with just my password. This is fine. But if I'm Josh, and I log out, right? Josh, PW, right? Josh can see the main page. Josh is admin. He wants to see the admin page. Now I can trigger and say, here you need a second factor. If you had it already, I would let you go through. But in here, you need to log in again. All right, so log in. There we go. And then Josh can see the admin page because it's admin. Daniel wouldn't be able to see it because he's not admin. So that's for MFA on a specific endpoint. But with MFA, you can do more interesting stuff. Right? You can do a endpoint, but you can also do, I want my my login to be recent enough. I don't want you to log in 3 days ago and be able to do privileged operations with that login from 3 days ago. I want you to refresh the login. So in that case, you can do a different authorization manager. In that case, it's an all required factor authorization managers. Okay, this is a factory. So with this factory, you can combine this with has role, authenticated, etc. This one is a direct authorization manager. This is an auth-z manager. So this one, you cannot easily do has role on it. OK, we say this one, and then required factor builder. And then we say, maybe for the password, I want that password to be valid. And so I want this to be a duration of seconds, 30 seconds. OK? Build. And this is a recent password. So with this, we can say for the password page, you must be logged in at least with your password. It's fine if you have OTT as well. And your password must be, the authentication that you obtained with your password must be at most 30 seconds old for the demo, right? And so in here, we could do auth-z.request matchers, and we want the password page, and then we want access again, right? And then in here, we say recent password, like this, right? And so now, the main page stays the same. I'm logged in with my password, but this was at 47:36. It's now 50, right? So it's like 3 minutes ago. So now if I go and say update password, I navigate to the password page, then an access denied exception is triggered and handled. I get redirected back to logging in with a password because I need a password. And it says, well, there's an error. The factor is password, and the reason is it has expired. Your authentication is too old. So I can log in again with my password, and then I can access the password change page, right? Like this. OK? And then you can do more complex stuff with MFA. It's a lot to show. I'm not necessarily going to show everything, but basically, this access, you can use it to combine rules together. So you can combine them using utility methods we have. So for example, we can say authorization managers, OAuth, and then authorization manager, any auth, and then maybe you have a recent password, right? Or you have authorization manager has roles. So either you have a recent password or you're admin. So you can combine these, and this gives you a manager, and so you can use that. Or you can even write your own Lambda in here, right? You can write and say, oh, if the role is admin, then I want MFA. If it's not admin, then I want just a simple password login. It's fine, right? So you can take them together, combine them, and then do all your authentication rules. So, wrapping up. I know, it's a lot. So MFA built around the new factor granted authority, which is the special authority that represents your login, when you logged in, how you logged in. You use the @enable multi-factor authentication to scaffold the infrastructure that you need to do MFA. And then it's all around the concept of this authorization manager factory that creates that has role method with an extra layer of MFA on top of it. So you can use it for your entire application with enable multi-factor authentication with a list of authorities, or on a given endpoint, so you will give you a authorization manager for that endpoint. And the utility method we have for building those is all required factors. Authorization manager Java naming is fun. All right. And little example we had when the authentication must be recent. With this all required factors authorization manager, you can say, I want password, and I want it to be that recent. Be careful, don't do 30 seconds, right? Because if you have two systems running in parallel and their clocks skew by a minute, then this is going to be a problem. But typically, you do like, oh, I want a password that's like 5 minutes old or something. And then you use it by saying, blah, 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 my endpoint dot access dot the thing we've created. All right? OK. I mean, oof, I'm ahead of schedule here. So MFA, great. Go check it out. Go try it out. Come with your feedback on the issue tracker. The second thing different that we've introduced is modular configuration. So when you configure a security for a Spring application, typically you do what we did here. So we create a bean of type security filter chain. The problem with this, we can see it in action. So I have a second app running, an authorization server here. So if I go to localhost 9000, this is an auth server, right? And this auth server, see, it asks me to log in, and it has endpoints, right? Well-known, OpenID configuration, not HTTPS, just HTTP. There we go. So it has this, description of what this auth server is doing. Right. OK. Now say I want to change this configuration because I want the page that's called public.html to be public, right? But it's not public. All right. So OK, I'm going to go and do this. So we go to the authorization server. There is a configuration class of some kind, maybe the Spring Boot application, just like Josh does. And then we do a security filter chain, SFC, takes HTTP security, HTTP. And then we said we want the public page to be public. Return http.build. And then maybe we say, OK, we want authorized HTTP requests, auth_z.request matchers public.html. Maybe they'll also put the error page in case something goes wrong, permit all. And then maybe we'll also say anything else. Oops, sorry. Nope, wrong. OK, auth_z.any request authenticated, right? So in here, my public page now should be public, meaning if I go here and I say localhost 8080 public.html, not found. Maybe. Public.html, did I type it right? Oh, it's the wrong server, 9000. Yeah, it's a public page, right? So this one is a public page. Now if I try go to private.html, I get a 403. I don't get the form login that I should be getting. And the problem is if here I say well-known OpenID configuration, I get HTTPS errors, fine. I also get a 403. Why is that? It's because we've produced a bean of type security filter chain, right? So whoops, I smashed Spring Boot's defaults. Scream, right? I want Spring Boot defaults. I just want to change this tiny little thing. So in here, I would have to go and find, oh, what do I need? I need form login. I need authorization server with certain customizations and so on. So we provided a new way of configuring that. Instead of providing an entire security filter chain, you're going to provide a customizer of HTTP security, right? And HTTP security customizer, this is a Lambda, takes HTTP, returns whatever you want, void, actually. And so in here, you can do your own changes. So you could say http.authorize HTTP request, auth_z, fine, auth_z.request matchers, public.html, permit all. And so that's the only change I make. And the rest is boot defaults. So now, if we go back here, after a little while, it restarts. The authorization server defaults are present. The public page, my change, oops, public.html, this one, still public, right? And if I try and go to, say, foobar, then I get form login, because it's a private page, and I need to log in to see it. So I've only changed a little bit of behavior while keeping boot. This customizer can apply to other things. Basically, anything that is under HTTP dot, so HTTP, say, OAuth2 authorization server, or HTTP, your favorite one, CSRF, right? Stuff like that. All of these, they apply some changes on a configurer, OAuth2 authorization server configurer, or CSRF is a CSRF configurer. So all of these configurers, you can modify just that bit as well by providing a bean of type customizer of that configurer. So OAuth2 authorization server configurer. Here we go. Auth_z configure customizer. The customizer. All right. And so in here, I can only change the defaults for the authorization server. So auth_z server, and then let's say we want to change the page that we see here with the claims. So that's the OIDC. In OIDC, we want to change OIDC.provider and configuration endpoint. So provider config. And this one has a claims customizer. Provider config dot provider configuration customizer. So that's the config. And in the config, I want to add a claim, say conference spring IO 2026. Here we go, right? OK, and so with this, I only change the authorization server. I don't act on the entire HTTP security. So that means when I go here, that's beautiful. When I go to the provider endpoint configuration, I have a new entry, that conference, right? So I've only changed the behavior that I care about at my top-level configurer for authorization server. All right. OK, so modular configuration, now you don't need to provide an entire security filter chain. Now, actually avoid doing that unless you want to change boot defaults. Boot defaults are usually pretty good for what you want to do. Instead, provide a customizer for either HTTP security or for, say, CSRF configurer, session management configurer, OAuth2 authorization configurer, and so on. And if your customizer has exceptions, we also have a throwing customizer variant. Right? So if you need to reach out to some external service to compute something in your customizer, then you can do a throwing customizer. OK, so we have MFA. We have modular configuration. And so we have a bunch of new things with OAuth2. So on the OAuth2 side, there are two things we've changed. There's the authorization server, and there is the client. So on the authorization server, the first big change that you might encounter if you have clients that are not Spring Security 7 is that we are now enforcing PKC, proof key for code exchange. So in the configuration of my authorization server here, if my clients have issues and they're not able to support proof key for code exchange, I need to set this to false. Require proof key to false, defaults to true. So basically, this is proof key for code exchange, aka PKC. And this is when a client makes an authorization request, they send a code challenge with some value. And then when they make a token request, they send a code verifier parameter. So if you see an error saying blah, 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 missing code challenge, or like a parameter error code challenge, that's because the authorization server wants your clients to send code challenge. If they don't, you can turn this behavior you can turn it off if you want. It's recommended that you leave it on. Even this was invented for public clients. So clients, say, on your Android device that cannot store a secret securely. But it's also now recommended for private client. So if the ecosystem you work with doesn't support it, you can always turn this off fairly easily here. The second thing we've added is dynamic client registration for OAuth2 authorization server. So you can turn it on, by saying client registration endpoint, right? This customizer here. And the thing that it does is it allows you to register clients using a formalized spec. So in here, there's the OIDC endpoint. There's also a special endpoint called OAuth authorization server that describes the OAuth2 features of my app, right? So it has a bunch of endpoints and so on. If I turn on client registration endpoint here with defaults, then in that case, after a little while, this refreshes, and we get a new endpoint exposed here, the registration endpoint. So if I want to register a new OAuth2 client, so beyond what I have in here, application.yaml, beyond these, or beyond what I have in my JDBC register client repository, I can now use this endpoint. So to use it in here, if I do HTTP 9000 or OAuth2 register, and here I need to pass the details of what I'm registering. So this is going to be, say, a client that has grant types. We're going to support authorization code, right? And then maybe also client credentials. Who knows? Right? Okay. And then redirect URI, since we do support authorization code. So maybe, I don't know, my client lives at https example.com/OAuth2/callback for the redirect URI. Fine. Something like that. And so if I do this and I send that, I get a 302. It tells me, but you must be logged in to do this, right? It's not allowed for everyone. So you must have a token to be able to talk to that endpoint. So first, let's obtain a token. Fine. So HTTP 9000 OAuth2 token. And I'm going to use the client credentials grant type, so the machine-to-machine, because it's much easier for a demo in my terminal, client credentials. And I also need to request some scopes, so the permissions. And so the scopes I need here is, what's it called? Client.create. If the client you use to make that token call doesn't have client create, you cannot register new clients. So you have kind of an admin client that is allowed to register other clients. And then you need to pass some credentials. So in here, I preset them to default client, default secret, -f, and then I should get a response. So here I have an access token. Fine, let's put this, can't see my cursor here, jq-r.access token. So we only have the access token. Yeah, oop. No, not this one. Come on, cursor. Auth. Here we go. Voila, I have the access token. I can inspect it if I want, but I'm just going to store it in here. Export demo token equals this. Voila. So now I have a token for my admin client, and so I can do my client registration call from here that I did back in the beginning, and then pass that token, authorization, put in quotes, authorization bearer, demo token. And so with this, I can register a new client. So now there's a new client on my authorization server. The client ID is randomly generated. I can set it if I want in that request in here when I pass these things. And then client secret, and then the details that come with it. If I try to do this again, I get invalid token, because I can only, using a given token, I can only register one client. And after that, the token is discarded. So if I want to register a new client, I must request a new token, and then I can register a new client. OK. Not everybody needs this. Actually, the only reason we implemented this, the only reason people cared about this, is because of MCP, Model Context Protocol. Because when you start, your, say, Claude desktop or something, in here, when you register a MCP client, you point it at a server, and then it registers itself. So that means you could have thousands of clients registered in your authorization server, which, for this to work, this thing doesn't have an admin client. So the fine folks that defined the spec of MCP, they said, well, anyone should be able to register. So let's do client registration. And so we needed to add open registration allowed. OK. So anyone can register. And then request matcher, OAuth2, register, permit all. Right? And so now, anyone can come in without a token, come in here, and then register a client, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and give me a denial of service. So this, personally, I think probably don't do this, right? In fact, they agree with me, and now, since we've implemented all of this, they said, no, that's the old way of doing things. Now we're going to do a completely new spec. It's possible. Do it at your own risk. You should probably do a little bit more infrastructure to verify who registers clients. So don't do open, force clients to be present. So that's for the auth server side. Pixie, client registration. For the client side, I have a third application that runs on port 8090 here. It's a OAuth2 resource server, and it has you go and say winners from 2022, and probably need quotes around this. So if I try and get that from my authorization server, I get HTTP 401, right, unauthorized, and says, oh, you must authenticate using a token. All right, fine. So I'll get a token, export demo token. Cool. And I do the same request here, and I say authorization bearer $demo token, right? OK, so I have a server, and it serves resources if I have a token. Now let's use that in a Spring application, in a client application. So there, I have a Hugo service here, and it's a component, and it's used in a controller. And so I could use a REST client, and then I can do, REST client dot builder, and then I probably need to pass a request interceptor, which is an OAuth2 blah 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 request interceptor that needs a OAuth2 authorized client manager, and yeah, complicated. Also, this just points at my authorization server. It doesn't really need to be a REST client. I don't really care about it. So what's really cool with Spring Framework 7 is that you can use HTTP service clients. So I can turn this component into an interface. So not a class anymore, interface, single C. All right? I make this a method of my interface. I say this is a request param that's going to be passed. And I say this is a get exchange. And it's going to get some resources at HTTP localhost 1890/Hugo. Let's get the nominees. And then let's say, that's it. The year is going to be as a param. And so with this, it needs to be available for other services to consume. So maybe in any configuration class of my application, I declare this is a service client, so MFA application here. And I say import HTTP services, and then I import Hugo service .class. And now, with this, I could be able to go to localhost Hugo. This is going to use that component, and it should fail. Not Hugo. Oh, yeah, OAuth2 Hugo. I think I called it OAuth2 Hugo. This should fail because, so I get a 500, right? The send point doesn't work on my client because the client is not sending a token. The HTTP service client is not sending a token. That's why we had the request interceptor for the REST client. So instead, we can configure the service client to use a client. So there's two things you need to do. Of course, this is beautiful, beautiful Java naming as well, right? So you must provide a bean, and the bean is auth type auth2 REST client HTTP service group configurer lol Java naming, right? And so we return OAuth2, import it, fine. OAuth2 thingy dot from OAuth2 authorized client manager, right? So this is the infrastructure that allows fetching tokens. And then it needs to know which client to use to get tokens, because in here in my client application, I declared 2 Spring Security OAuth2 client registrations. I have my admin client. I also have a default client to get bland tokens that can't create stuff. So in here, I say client registration ID is called default client, we said. And with this, after the app restarts, we get the full client, blah, 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 blah. Let's restart the application one more. And is the name correct? Default client. Client registration ID. Default client. Here we go. Oh, no. Oh, I know, of course. There's one more thing I need to do. Does anybody know what could be missing from here? So in here, it's Spring Security that's giving me a client authorization required exception. This is an internal exception that says, go fetch a token. I'm missing the infrastructure to go fetch a token. So in here, I need to say, I want auth2 client with defaults, of course. Otherwise, it doesn't catch the exception, doesn't go fetch a token. Nothing works, right? And so in here, I got redirected to localhost 9000, my authorization server. I log in with Daniel SSO. Cool. And then boom, first try, right? So with this now, instead of having to configure your REST client, point at the right things, put the encodings and so on, you can use the new HTTP service clients from Spring Framework with this and a bean, and that's it. The rest, the clients in application YAML and the auth2 client, you already had it in the past for the REST client. Okay, right. So new things, authorization server, PXE. So if you have things that tell you, oh, there's a problem with code challenge, then probably the clients can't use PXE and you want to turn it off. And dynamic client registration for OAuth2. And on the client, we support HTTP service clients. The new things you need to do is add client registration ID on the method or on the class, and the famous OAuth2 REST client HTTP service group configurator, which you can apply further customizations to. All right. We have time for MCP security. Beautiful. MCP, Model Context Protocol. Anybody uses Model Context Protocol here? Yeah, maybe a shy 10%, 50% of the room. So we created a project to track this in Spring AI community. So it's not in Spring Security, because these guys, they change their mind every 6 months. And Spring Security, we work on the security thing, where the thing where we get to there, we do a pre-draft, and it takes 5 years, and then we put it as a draft, and then 12 years later, we have an RFC. That's not the way startups and AI works, so that is not going into core Spring Security, but it's the people from Spring Security, it's me and Joe, who work on this. It will eventually, once they stabilize on what they actually want from MCP, it will go into Spring AI itself. This is where it will live. So you can go there. There's a bunch of documentation. The way you use it, you've seen Josh do it this morning, maybe really fast. You go to start.spring.io, right? And so in here, you say, I want, say, an MCP server, right? And with this, you can say, I want MCP security. So it's marked experimental, because it moves really fast, even faster than the rest of the AI ecosystem. And so when you do this in your Gradle or POM, if you don't want to be too scared, in your POM, you'll have the Spring AI dependencies, so Spring AI starter MCP, and a MCP server starter, right? If you change and you say, well, no, I don't want to secure my MCP server, I want to secure my MCP client, you just change this to client, you keep the security bit, and if you have this, we will put the MCP starter, the Spring Boot AI starter MCP client, and the correct starter for the client. And because MCP, they want everything to be included in the vision of the world, the authorization server as well. Because MCP security is based on OAuth2, and it wants features that are not released anywhere. So there's this new client ID metadata. I think we're starting to see releases in the wild, but nobody supports this, right? So we do more stuff so you can enhance your authorization server to use that. And in general, if you want to see kind of in detail how it works, let's close these. I'm going to run the samples from that MCP security project. Open, recent project, MCP security. In this window. There you go. So in here, there's the code, but you have a bunch of samples if you want to see how to configure them. Usually it's very, very small. It's like kind of a Spring Boot starter. So start the authorization server. I'm going to start just the MCP server. And so the MCP server, if I call it HTTP 8090/MCP, it tells me 401 because I need to pass a token, but it also exposes this resource metadata endpoint. And so this is what MCP uses to discover where is the authorization server, what should I pass, and so on. And if you want to see it in real life, you can run this Model Context Protocol Inspector project, which is a client for MCP. And if it starts, let's connect from this. Come on. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I know I'm not connected. Beautiful. My third time's the charm. Here we go. First try. All right. So this is a thing for interacting with the MCP servers. And if you want to see what happens, so you put the URL of your MCP server here, and you can go to OpenAuth settings. It has a magic quick OAuth flow that does everything for you. But if you want to see the details, you can go to guided OAuth flow here. And so it shows the different steps that must happen. So it says, oh, first I do metadata discovery. So I'm going to talk to the MCP server, and I get this data about it. And in there, it points me to the authorization server. So then I call the authorization server. The authorization server has a registration endpoint at some point somewhere in here, registration endpoint. OK, cool. So now the client knows they can register a client. Boom, client registration happens. Here's the client that you get back. OK, then you do the token flow. So let's go here. Daniel, oh no, it's here. It's user. Pass. I have a safe password in here, which is password. There we go. Get an authorization code. Pass the code. get the token request, authentication token, token complete. I have my tokens. I can now connect, right? And so now your MCP server is secure, can get the tokens, can use, like it finds the username inside the token, and then that's it. All right, if you want to learn more about this, because it's an entire talk, you can go to an entire talk about it tomorrow at 11:30, if I'm not wrong. James and Maximilian from AWS are going to be talking about MCP in general, and they will be covering security, track 3. It's going to be fun. Go there. And with that, if you want the code for this presentation, it's over there. Take your time. Take a little bit of a picture. If you have time, come chat with me. Like, give me feedback on how I can improve this talk. Probably speak slower, maybe. I don't know. If you have questions, if you have projects you want to show me, reach out. And if you're too shy, you can reach me by email, Blue Sky, so on. And I have one last surprise for you. I am not busy enough, so I'm also writing a book about testing Spring Boot applications. It's in early access, so the first 4 chapters are online right now. You can go and get them. They gave me a discount code. It's valid for 2 weeks on the entire site of Manning, the publisher. So go wild. There's also a book by Craig Walls, which is great, about Spring AI. There's a book. There's the famous Laurentius Spilka Spring Security in Action there as well. So, now's your occasion. And with that, I am sorry, I ran over. Sanderson is yelling at me. Thank you very much. See you at the party after.